I'm the Adult Program Coordinator at the Derry Public Library, and I'm also joined by, in the back, Jen, I don't know how to pronounce your last name? Fielker. I was about to say Tiekler, and I'm like, I don't think that's it. Jen Fielker, who is the director at the Taylor Library in East Derry. So we've come together tonight. We've actually been collaborating on a couple of programs this season. We collaborated on the Nosferatu screening that we had this past Friday, so if anyone was there, thank you. I think that was one of the best attended adult programs in history for our library, so thank you. We're collaborating on this, and we're also going to be collaborating for the Jeff Ballinger program, 'Twas the Fright Before Christmas, which will also be at the Opera House on November 15th. So I just wanted to thank everyone for coming out here tonight, and thank the Taylor Library for all of their help bringing this program to Derry, and of course thank Ken Gloss, our presenter tonight. And with that, I'm going to turn the floor over to our rare book expert.
Thank you very much. And the way this all started is I got called to the Taylor Library to look at their older collection. That happens a lot, that the older libraries, they have the books. Librarians, gee, these have been here 100+ years. What do we do with them? Are they valuable? Do we have to take special care of them? Is there that one that will pay for a new library? Unfortunately, there wasn't. But it's a way I get to go to libraries, and I actually like helping libraries when I can. Matter of fact, I'll give a story about that, how my father got started because of a public library. What I do in the talk will last about 45 minutes to an hour. The first half hour or so, I'll give part of my background, the history. I'll talk about places, people, things that I've seen in looking for books. Talk a little bit, I hope all of you watch Antiques Roadshow, but I'll talk a little bit about how that show works and things get done with it. And then I'll tell some more stories. And basically, anecdotes, people have come in. Then I'd like to do 10, 15 minutes of question and answer, because I can go on and on and on and on about old books. And at least with question and answer, I can go on about what you want to listen to. Then I'll tell one or two more things about books. At around 7 o'clock, I'll end the talk, end the formal part. So if anyone wants to leave, fine. But if anyone has any books or other questions, I'll stay. But I don't do it in any order, anything. I just let people crowd around. You're more than welcome to listen over my shoulder. I find that's the fastest way to get it done. And quite honestly, my wife sort of is on me now because I'm a little bit older. She says I only work half a day now. I get to work at 5:30 in the morning. The store closes at 5:30. That's 12 hours. It's half a day. And then when I'm at a group like this, there's a few extra hours added in. But I love what I do, so in any case. One thing, since I brought it up, I will mention the public library part that I like. This is a family business. My parents bought the store in 1949. Brattle Book Shop was literally going out of business. They were getting married. My mother had $500. They bought half interest in the Brattle Book Shop. My father built it on his great love of books, his hard work, his knowledge. He was a bit of a character and a showman. And the way he first got interested in books was when he was a young boy, like 5, 6, 7 years old. He used to go to the East Boston branch of the Boston Public Library, and they had storytelling in the children's section, although I don't know if they had a specific children's section at that time. And there was a woman who read from the N.C. Wyeth books, you know, the sort of classic stories, and he used to memorize and remember a lot of them. And it was a rougher neighborhood at the time, and he would go out and retell the stories. And if there were any of the kids trying to bully him, a lot of the other kids would stop them because they go, he's the storyteller. You can't do that. We need to hear the stories. And that's how he first got an interest in books, was through the public library. So I like coming to them. But the store was built by my father. We've had 7 different locations over the years, mainly due to urban renewal. And we've always been in Boston. People on Brattle Street and Harvard Square, they call us, say, where are you? We tell them we're downtown. When my parents bought the store, there was a little side street in what was Scully Square called Brattle Street. To make it even more confusing, the street doesn't exist anymore. It's where Boston City Hall Plaza is now. And most of the moves were because of urban renewal, and every time we'd move, my father would move the best books to the new location and then run sales, half price, $1.50, quarter dime, and then at that point, everything was free, and he would literally have hundreds of people line up with bags, packs, satchels, whatever, ring a big bell. People go charging into the store, grab whatever they could grab. 5 minutes later, he'd ring the bell again. That group would leave. The next group would come in, and he gave away over 250,000 books that way. Now, the last time he did this was in 1969, and there were books left over at the end of the giveaway. And like I said, my father was a bit of a character and a showman, if you can picture this. He hired a covered wagon with a cowboy and a horse team, and on the cover of the covered wagon it said, "Go west, book lovers, go 5 West Street, Brattle Book Shop." They filled it up with books, and they drove it from the end of Washington Street near Boston City Hall, up Court Street, down Tremont by the Boston Common, to where West Street is, where we are now, and then back down Washington with my father sitting in back, throwing books out the whole way. Now, the superintendent in charge of traffic was a friend of his, told him he could do it all morning, but within an hour, the city was in an absolute standstill. They told him to stop. He didn't care. He'd gotten his point across. And when we first moved on to West Street, we were in a 150-year-old building filled with books. I got a call at 4 o'clock in the morning in February of 1980. The building was on fire. It literally burnt to the ground. I mean, it was 100% gone. But we wanted to keep going, to continue, not go out of business. We found a storefront a few doors up the street. We rented folding tables like you have here. People either sold, gave us, donated books. Kevin White, who was the mayor at the time, came down with a carload of books. And within a month, we reopened. It was a meager stock, but the main thing was just continue. 4 years, we rebuilt the stock. 4 years after that, we bought the building we're in now, which is, again, on West Street. And it's sort of the old Dickensian type of store. Outside stands at $1, 3 and 5, 2 floors of general used books, and a 3rd floor with rare books, autographs, manuscripts, leather bindings, and so on. And that type of business, the large, old, general secondhand bookstore, is a dying business. And it's not dying because people don't like books, buy books, sell books, read books, but particularly in the cities, property value has gone so high, that rent has gone so high, that old bookstores, which I can assure you are not the most efficiently run businesses in the world, one right after the other have been going out of business. Now, like I say, we bought our building in the early 80s. I hope to do this for years to come. I have daughters who are in now 30s and 40. I don't think they have any interest in coming into it the way I have. I have grandchildren. The oldest is 4, so all I have to do is maybe wait another 20 years and last that. And I've done this all my life. My parents say my first word was book. That I don't know. But maybe it was, and I'm sure they were talking about books all the time. And then I worked after school in elementary school, junior high school, summers during college. I have a degree in chemistry from the University of Massachusetts. I was going to get a doctoral degree at the University of Wisconsin, but in 1973, I needed a year off. My father's health wasn't that good. That year now is 50-something years, and I don't regret for a minute that I'm doing this and not in a laboratory somewhere. And one of the really fun parts about the business is going out and getting books. I mean, we go out to estates and people moving almost every day. Tomorrow I'm going up to Maine for 3,000 books. Friday I have to go look at 5,000 to 10,000 books in Turner's Falls, and it's not always that many, but it's almost like being Jim Hawkins on Treasure Island every day, never knowing who you're going to meet, the people, the places, the characters. And I'll relate a few of those stories. And actually, sometimes when you talk about characters, it's not just the people you're going to see, the customers, it's even sometimes our employees. This was a long time ago when I first started working full-time at the store for my father. And I had a new employee who was starting to work, and he had been there a day or two, and an older man came in the store and asked for a relatively obscure author named Donovan Yates, a novelist. I knew who Donovan Yates was, went to the section, looked. We didn't have anything. I said to the man, do you want to leave your name? At the time, we had index cards that we kept everybody's name on. He said, no, I don't want to, but maybe I'll check back again sometime. He left, and my employee, who had been there a day or two, said, does that man come in here often? And I said, you know, I really wasn't paying attention, but no, I don't see him. He goes, oh, well, that was J.D. Salinger. Yeah, I used to date his daughter. and then this employee, he worked for us for a long time, but it never ended, the things like that. And about a month after he started working, it's one of the most memorable introductions. I mean, this is 50 years later, and I'm still telling the story. My wife likes to say that she worked for, the way she said it, people, at the time, people would ask you, what do you do? When she works at the store now. But she says, well, I work for the Boston's local professional basketball team. She figured people would say. Anyways, we had 4 Celtics tickets. And I said, Hugh, do you want a couple of tickets to go to the basketball game? And he said, yeah, but why don't you give them to me and I'll meet you there. My wife and I get there, and he's sitting there with a woman. And he goes, hi, I'd like you to introduce you to my wife, Mickey. We're getting divorced tomorrow. What do you say to an introduction like that? And
congratulations.
well, in any case, but it was fine. Anyways, some of the buys and places we've gone, I got a call, and a lady, her name was Mrs. Fisher. I got back to the store, she had called. I called her up, and she said, oh yes, my father died in Providence. He has 500 art reference books. We want to get the best price we can. We're inviting a number of dealers down to come and bid on them. Would you be interested? Well, 500 art reference books at the time sounded like a really good library. Providence is only an hour away. I mean, we drive all over the Northeast, all over New England, sometimes even further than that. So an hour's really nothing. They lived in an old street called Benefit Street up near Brown University. I got to the house. It was a large old colonial house. Got led through the house into a courtyard, into a garage. Second floor of the garage, they had 5,000 books. Well, it turned out her married name was Fisher. Her father's name was John Nicholas Brown. Family founded Brown University, one of the wealthiest families in the country. And after about 6 months, I bought 80% of the books I wanted. I was pleased. She was happy. And she said, my mother has a lot of books. Most are being given to the university. Some are being sold at auction. But would you like to go to Newport to take a look at the books there? Well, their house in Newport is one of the mansions on the ocean. I mentioned this to my wife. She decided to come with me on this deal. And one of the fascinating parts about that was at one point, being in that house and wandering from the basement to the attic all on my own without a tour guide saying, come here, go here, don't touch this, just sort of it was fascinating. Another time I got called to Newport to do an appraisal. Now, I come to groups like this and I do hundreds of free appraisals. People call on the phone at the store all the time. People send emails. And we do many, many free verbal appraisals, but there are times when people need very formal written appraisals for insurance, estate taxes, whatever. Then we talk about charging and costs. But I got called to Newport to do an appraisal. Another mansion, not as big as the Browns. This was the Perry family. Commodore Perry, Oliver Hazard Perry. What they had was a whole series of papers, stack of papers from the War of 1812. During the war, the family were privateers. Well, they're privateers if you're on our side. They're pirates if you're on the other side. It's all the way you look at it in your perspective. But these were the day-to-day accountings of the ships. And they were fascinating to read through. They would sometimes capture a ship and realize tens of thousands of dollars profit. In 1812, that was an incredible amount of money. Then one of the ships got into a battle. The ship got hit. The captain got hit. He lost his leg. 3 days later, there was a tiny entry at the bottom of a page, and it said, Captain, $5 bonus, loss of leg. And that was the last you heard of the captain. So it's a little different nowadays. When my father was still alive, and he died over 30 years ago, we got a call from a lady. She was very vague about her name, who she was, what she had, but it sounded like she might have some interesting books. So, and it was close. She lived in Sharon, which is very close to Boston. We decided to go out to the house. We got there, it was a little ranch house, paint was peeling, weeds were growing. You sort of say, what's going to be here? She answered the door. She was quite elderly. We walk in, and there were just gorgeous antiques everywhere. I mean, really, really beautiful antiques. It turned out she was originally from the Boston area, but she had married the Prince of the Ukraine, the cousin of the Tsar of Russia. He had escaped just before the revolution, and she told story after story about being Russian nobility in Europe and all the court intrigues and all the goings on, how T.E. Shaw used to stay at their house all the time, how she didn't think he accidentally died on a motorcycle, but there was a lot more to it. T.E. Shaw, of course, was Lawrence of Arabia. And she went on and on and on with these wonderful stories. Turned out her books were lousy, but the stories were absolutely wonderful. And when we first got into the house, on one of her walls, she had 10 watercolors, maybe a little smaller than that photograph there, but 10 pastoral European scenes. And when I first got there, I thought they were nice. And the more she talked and the longer we were there and the more I looked at them, the nicer I thought they were. And I finally said to her, those 10 watercolors are really nice. And she turned around and sort of said, oh yes, they're all Turners. She had 10 original Turners, probably $1 million worth of paintings. And it was like, oh yes, they're all, so you never know what you're gonna see or the people, the characters. And matter of fact, speaking of characters, we went to one of our customers' 100th birthday parties. Now, when you go to a man's 100th birthday party, and he tells you he just got back from Barcelona, he's going to give a talk in Florida, and he's been asked to lecture in Tokyo. And I finally said to him, wait a minute, you're 100 years old. Don't you think Tokyo's a long way to go? And he said, well, when I used to work, it took me well over 25 hours to get to Chicago. He says, I don't think Tokyo's a whole lot further than that nowadays. And here's a man who could tell you about sitting down to dinner with Henry Ford and Thomas Edison. I mean, he was obviously much younger, and he said he was really looking forward to this dinner, all the learning and insight he was going to get from these two men. He said he got there a little bit early. He sat down. About 5 minutes later, Ford came in and sat down next to him. And about 15 minutes later, Edison came in. Now, Edison was elderly, had one of those big horns for hearing, and sat down opposite. And he said the first thing, Ford turned to Edison and yelled, "My Tom, you look very good." And Edison turned to him and yelled, "It's the Carter's little liver pills." This man said all night long, all they did was yell about Carter's little liver pills. And he said next time he wanted to learn something, he went to the library. I can go on and this, on and on, but I'll tell one more in this vein. We get hundreds of phone calls at the store. People wanting to know, do you have a book? Can you get a book? How hard is it to get the book? Does the book exist? Or what's the value? How much is it worth? And so on. Most of those questions, either I or the people I work with, we can answer right off the top of our heads. Some are a little more involved, and occasionally really have to do some research, but that can be fun. But every once in a while, you get a call that really stands out. And again, this was a while ago, but I answered the phone. Hello, Brattle Book Shop. Can I help you? Lady, thick Irish brogue, elderly, but the first thing she says is, "President Kennedy slept with me." Now, you have to admit that gets your attention. And she stopped and waited for it to sink in. And then she went on to explain she had worked for the Kennedy family. When he was 2 and 3 years old, he used to fall asleep in her arms. So he did sleep with her, but not what you first think. And what she had was a whole series of handwritten letters from the president. Now, she wanted to get an offer on them. Handwritten letters from later 20th century presidents are particularly rare, high-priced, and valuable. I was actually skeptical about that, but I thought she'd be fun to meet. I went to her house. She was great, wonderful stories. Letters were great, fabulous letters. I gave her what I thought was a tremendous offer, much as I suspected, though. There was no way she could sell these letters. They were a part of her life. I left a note behind. As far as I know, her family still has them, probably where they belong, but who knows? Maybe someday I'll hear again. And a lot of it is a joy. And then sometimes people ask me, well, what's some of the more valuable or more interesting or things that you've got to see, appraise, hold, own, whatever? And a few things that I'll mention. I got a call once from a museum in Boston. They were loaning something from their museum to another museum, and they had to put an insurance value on it. And I'm a member of the museum, and I said, sure, I'll do it for free. I mean, I like being able to help out museums. I said, but I don't want to do this from your website. I don't want to do it from a copy. I want to see the original. And they said, fine, just make an appointment, come in. So at one point, I was there holding a 4-page handwritten account of Paul Revere's Ride by Paul Revere that he had written out. I mean, the fact that that even exists, and you know, you get in touch and hold, I mean, it was, and you know, he's talking about the British stopped me and they told me to get off my horse or they're going to blow my head off. And I mean, he literally 4 pages. It was amazing, and you get to touch it. I got called another time, and these are a few that I got called on to do appraisals, not things I've owned. But like I said, I was a chemistry major. I like science. I got called by a local university they wanted me to look at a few of their books. And one of the books they had was the first edition of Principia Mathematica done in the 1600s by Isaac Newton. And I mean, that's the foundation of modern mathematics. A first edition of that in good condition, which this was, is $1 million so. But this copy was Isaac Newton's copy with his notes in the margins. So, I mean, you're sitting there holding Isaac Newton's copy. Now, this book went from the school in Wellesley to MIT to the Huntington Library in Pasadena. Before the pandemic, I was at a book show in Pasadena. I went to the Huntington Library, saw the bookcase. It was in a sealed case. They wouldn't let me touch it again, but I got to touch it. My manager and I one time got called. We didn't know what we got called for, but it turned out to be in a room like this in a basement of a building. And there was a folding table, and on the folding table were 3 pieces of paper. And one was the Bill of Rights, one was the Pilgrim Charter, and one was a printed copy of the Declaration of Independence. It wasn't the first, it was a year later. It was the first one, though, that ever printed the names of the signers. Because being a signer then, if they had lost the war, they were all traitors. But handwritten in ink across the top of that declaration was, "This is a true and authentic copy, John Hancock." So, I mean, and I have to admit, I put my little finger on each one of those. But it was the Massachusetts State Archives. And they were opening a museum right, they're in the same parking lot as the Kennedy Library. They're a little across the street. If you ever go to the Kennedy Library, go to the State Archives also. It's not a big museum, but it's great. But one of the things that fascinated me about that appraisal was the reason they needed it appraised, which is almost impossible to do, because how do you replace the Pilgrim Charter or whatever? But in any case, they wanted a value because they were sending him to North Andover for some restoration, and they wanted an insurance value. And anyways, we got something down. But I was told when they drove them from Boston to North Andover, they did it with a state police escort, and they literally shut down Route 93. They did not want any other cars on the road. So it was like a motorcade. They just shut it down. And then when they returned them, they did the same thing. And they never did that for me, though. But, you know, so you never sometimes know. And I remember one time I got called to Belmont. Some people were cleaning out an attic, and there was a big trunk. They were just about done cleaning out. At the bottom of the trunk was a larger manila envelope. It turned out in that envelope were 10 letters of Thomas Jefferson, 5 or 6 of John Adams, and some of the other presidents. But there was one letter in particular that I liked. And I used to bring things home to show to my kids when they were in school. And, you know, it got to be, oh, Dad's bringing home another Audubon, or Dad's bringing home this. And it was, anyways, one of the letters, and this was just after 9/11, was a letter of Thomas Jefferson talking about what you do about traitors and terrorists. Literally, that's what he was talking about. Now, it was the War of 1812, and basically he said they should get the full protection of the law and absolutely nothing else. And I brought it home. I showed it to my daughters at the time. They were maybe 10, 15, 10, 12. And they said, can we bring this to school for show and tell? And, but they really got excited. I said, no, but whatever. But, I could really tell I had something when it even excited my daughters. And then sometimes it can go in a different way. We bought a collection of books. It was about 2,000 cookbooks. And there were some really rare ones, 1800s, some from the 1700s, some more modern ones, but signed Julia Child, that type of thing. And there was a box of pamphlets. And what the box of pamphlets, it was like gold medal flour, making Jell-O, Baker Chocolate Company, these little brochures from the turn of the last century, very colorful. Some are collectible, some have some value, but I said to one of the people I work with, I said, let's just put them out on the dollar table. We've got to spend the time on the rare books. There'll be some bargains there, but anyways. About 2 hours later, a man comes running in with one of those, and he was beside himself. It's really hard to describe how excited he was. He goes, I've been looking for this for years and years and years. And he goes, and it was $1 and it's out there. And he went on and on and on and on. And just, I can't believe I've got it. And finally I looked at it. The title was Coconuts and Constipation. You never know what people are looking for or what's going to turn them on. Or you also don't know always how collections start and form. We had a man, and because people come to me sometimes and say, what should I collect? And basically I say, collect something that you enjoy, that you have fun, that you enjoy looking at, that you want to know about, that you can afford. That's also an important part. And that you do it, and then it will progress, and maybe you'll change your mind and start collecting something else. But it's about having fun, and maybe you make contacts and meet people and meet dealers and enjoy that, and that will be fun. But this man collected postcards of Europe, which there are millions and millions of postcards of Europe, and a lot of them, are 100 years old, 150. But the point of that with him was he wanted to know where all of the postcards were from. Now that sounds, well, Google nowadays, but this was before the computer revolution. But think about this. If you have a postcard that says Scully Square, well, if you're from the Boston area, you'd know Scully Square is in Boston. But if you're living in Hamburg, Germany, where the heck is Scully Square? Well, Europe is even more difficult because of all the wars, the boundary changes, the political changes, name changes. A lot of it can be a real research project. So he had this postcard collection, but then he had a travel guide collection, 100-year-old. He had a history book collection. He had an atlas collection. He had reference book collections. He had one of the best collections of maps, atlases, guidebooks, travel books of Europe that you could put together, all because he wanted to see what postcards was. And I will say for him, he did take trips and go to some of these obscure places and try to see what they were, but what a great collection. And when I go to people's houses, a lot of times when we get called on books, they'll call up and they'll say, we have an estate. And then we ask a few questions. One of the first questions we ask is, how many books do you have? And of course, one of the first answers is a lot. And then we go, well, what kind of books do you have? And the first answer is fiction and nonfiction, which is every book ever done. So we try to get it down. Now, one of the things nowadays is if the books are on shelves, if you just take a good in-focus pictures of the shelves, we can tell. But one of the things that we do next is, before we, or as we make the appointment to go to their house, which we do almost every day, if there's anything that's personal that you, your family, anyone involved in this particularly wants, make sure you have that out ahead of time, because when we get there, I can look at walls of books very quickly, unless they're very rare books, but I can do it. But what I can't do is go, have someone say, oh, wait a minute, Uncle so-and-so gave me this when we were here, and here a 10-minute story about that, and then, well, wait a minute, no, this one, all of that ahead of time, and it just makes it easier. But when I was cleaning out my father's library, of course, then I was the one going, oh yeah, I remember this or that or whatever. And one of the collections he had that I'm going, this is strange, because he liked the movies, but he had about 300 or 400 8x10 movie stills, photographs of scenes in movies. And I'm going, I know he liked movies, but I never knew he collected these. Then I started looking at them, and I realized every single one of those movie stills had a picture of a book in it. It might have been the actor holding a book. It might have been a picture. It might have been a library behind them. It might have been a book on the table. It might have been a picture with a picture in the picture of a book. And every single one of them had a book in it. So that's where that collection came from. Now, one of his friends knew he had it. I gave it to the friend. It was a good friend. I still sort of, I should have kept it, but whatever. People ask me if I collect books, and the answer is no. I do not collect books. And the reason I don't collect books is my father used to bring home 5, 6, 7 books a day. Do that for 30 or 40 years. And you can imagine what we had. And he meant to read a chapter or whatever, introduction, a book jacket. I read a lot. I read a lot of books about book collecting. I read a lot of history. I read Stephen King and John Grisham. John Grisham wrote a book about book theft and so on called Camino Island. I have a particular interest in that one. If you ever read it, you'll know why. And John Grisham heard about that basically I'm a character in the book, other than my name is different. I don't know John Grisham, but I was doing an Antiques Roadshow in Green Bay, Wisconsin. I was in Sheboygan at a museum. I got a call from my shop, and they said, someone called. He said he's John Grisham, but we don't know. But anyways, here's the number. And I called, and it was. And he said, well, I heard you weren't thrilled about the new book. And I said, well, you know, in the book, I was a fence for stolen books. And the reason I was doing that is we had a failing business. I said, you know, I don't mind that much being called a thief, but a failing business? That bothered me. He said, well, I owe you a dinner. This was 4 or 5 years, 5, 6 years ago now. He still owes me the dinner, but if I'm ever in Charlottesville, I do have his cell number, and I'll be doing that. But my wife had a collection of over 1,000 books on jazz and roots music. She had a great collection, but we downsized, and she said it was time. And she was afraid, actually, with that collection, that she said 10, 15 years from now, a lot of people won't know who these musicians are. Although she had some great stuff. She also had signed studio photos. A couple of those. She had one that W.C. Handy inscribed to U.B. Blake. She had one, the best one that she liked was she had one of a marquee at a site, and it was Louis Armstrong, and then down the marquee was featuring Billie Holiday. But it was inscribed to Pops Who Taught Me Everything, Billy. And, but she let that go. Now, one collection we do have that started off as a bit of a joke. Now, there are books like this one that they have decorative covers. And the reason they have decorative covers is before dust jackets as we know them. Dust jackets go way back, but they were very plain and simple. As we know dust jackets, it's around World War I. That's when the technology. But before that, a lot of books were done with decorative covers. And the reason they were done like this is the publisher figured if the book caught your eye as you walked in the store, more chance you'd buy it. And there are people who collect books like this just for the decorative value. You know, individually they might not seem like much, but as a collection, graphically, they can be quite good. And you can go to yard sales, book sales, auction houses, bookstores, antique stores, and pick up most of these very reasonably. Some are expensive, but very reasonably. Well, what happened was there was one day I went to a house, I bought a collection, there was a book, had a picture of a toilet on the cover. The title was Flushed with Pride, The Life of Thomas Crapper. invented the toilet. So I brought it home, I showed it to my wife. She took one look at it and said, we've got to put this in the bathroom. So we did. A few days later, I got another book that had a big eye staring out of the cover. The title was We Never Sleep. It was a history of the Pinkerton Detective Agency. But with a big eye staring at you, I thought, put that in the bathroom too. Now this is a little half bathroom, so there's no shower, no steam. Next thing you know, we built bookshelves, and there were about 300 or 400 of these Victorian-style illustrated books in the bathroom. People walk in, they're a little taken aback, but loads of reading material. And one of the rules of the collection is that nothing can be valuable, because every once in a while a book will fall off the shelf, and you can imagine where it ends up. And that's a lot of fun. Now, one other collection I do have that none of you are going to be able to see, but I'll show it to you anyways. This is lots and lots of pages like this, and every page is single spaced, and it either has a word, 2 words, a phrase, maybe a sentence. Every single one of these is a story and I keep adding to it. And I could do a lecture here in this way. I could put it on the wall. I won't throw dots at it, and I could pick out 10 or 12 of them and just do a story that way. Matter of fact, well, one I'll mention when I'm talking about the Antiques Roadshow, but here's one. It's about postponements. People call up, like I say, we go out almost every day. And another thing that you don't think about dealing with a used bookstore is, you think about someone in my position, you sit there, you're talking about books, you're looking at old books, maybe, very carefully. Well, you don't think about what happens if you buy 1,000 books in a 5th floor walk-up at 95-degree temperature. You've got to carry 1,000 books out of a 5th floor walk-up, 95-degree temperature. If any of you were thinking of it, a job applicant comes into the store. Okay, first question, any knee injuries, back injuries, arm injuries, foot injuries, whatever? Do you have any second question, any allergies to dust, mold, mildew? Then the third question is, okay, where'd you go to school, what's your background, and so on. And quite honestly, if they say we were a short order cook or worked on a loading dock, that's actually better than if you love reading, because it's work. But in any case, there are times when we set up appointments and just life happens, someone calls up and has to postpone. Maybe there's childcare, maybe sickness, whatever, and you understand it. It's a little frustrating. I mean, you blocked out that time to go to the house, but fine, you reschedule. Well, we had a customer who was still a customer, and he was a friend, and he was having some hard times, and this was about 25 years ago. And he had a storage area in Cambridge. Now, it was a good storage area. It had lights, it had electricity, but he said, I've got to sell some things. And we said, fine, we'll go over and look. We made an appointment, he postponed. We rescheduled, he postponed. We rescheduled, he postponed. We rescheduled. And finally I said, after 4 times, I said, Russ, if you postpone again, I don't care what you have, we are not going. The 5th time, he calls up, he goes, I have to postpone, but it's not my fault, it's not my fault. And there was a lady had a storage area next to his. And it was actually a sad story. Her husband was an abusive alcoholic. He had run out on the family 20 years before that, and so on. And the night before, she was in the hospital, literally on her deathbed. And her daughter was there, and she said to her daughter, tomorrow I want you to go to this storage area in Cambridge. I want you to find my storage unit, then I want you to go in it, and what you will find is in the storage area, you'll find a freezer. In the freezer, you'll find your father. She had murdered him 20 years before, put him in a freezer. Fortunately, the electricity never went off. And I said, Russ, okay, that's a good excuse. And it was on the news that night. So you never know. And I could go on and on with stories, but in any case, I mentioned the Antiques Roadshow. I hope all of you watch it. It's a lot of fun to do. I've done it for a little over 20 years, and one of the reasons I hope all of you watch it is the better their ratings, the more public television will give them another season, And, you know, if you go all around the country, I mean, now I've been to every state. Why would I ever go to Fargo or Boise or Omaha? But anywhere you go in this country, anywhere, if you have a little extra time, and I'm lucky because my wife usually goes with me, and we usually can go a few days early, so we actually get to see it. Anywhere you go in this country, spend any effort at all, it's beautiful, everywhere. The people are absolutely wonderful. Do not talk about politics and religion. But everywhere in this country, the people are wonderful, nice, and so on, and maybe everybody should get to know each other better, and that would maybe solve a few problems. But that's a lot of fun. But the way that show works is you appraise. It used to be at convention centers. Now it's at states or museums or whatever. And you essentially appraise from one day. There are 3,000 or 4,000 people come to a show. Each person brings 2 items. 6,000 to 8,000 items come in. And they tape about 100, a little over 100, which makes up 3 hours of TV. One of the things a lot of people don't realize is appraisers on the show do not get paid. I mean, to the point, we don't get airfare, we don't get hotels, we don't get meals. But if you get on television, 8.5 million people watch the show. But there's also no guarantee that you're going to get on television because they don't there's a few things that they invite people early, but they really do not pre-do anything. So people come in, you're there, you appraise from about 7 in the morning, sometimes 7 in the evening, 12 hours. You have a table with 3 book appraisers next to print appraisers, next to photography, next to posters, whatever. And people who come to the show, first of all, they give out 3,000 or 4,000 tickets in the lottery, but sometimes 30,000 people apply. So the people who got the tickets have essentially won the lottery. Some of them drive hundreds of miles to get to the show. When they get to the show, they wait in the line. When they go through the line, they go to what they call triage. There's 6 or 8 appraisers who do not give values. They just say, okay, you go to paintings, you go to prints, you go to books, you go to... When they do that, then they get in another line and wait for you to appraise. And you have to, you know, people have gone through a lot, they're excited. You want to look, but for an appraiser on the show, the ideal day of an appraiser on the Antiques Roadshow is around 8 or 8:30 in the morning. Someone comes in with an item that is an interesting item, there's an interesting story. They don't know everything there is to know about it. And you call over a producer. The producer, out of earshot of the guests, says, why do you want to put this on? You explain it. They go talk to the guest. They go, great, go film it. So by 9:30, you film something. Your rest of your day is easy. I mean, you've already filmed. But if you haven't filmed something, if it's 4 or 5 in the afternoon, you start getting really nervous because you could easily not have filmed anything. I was in one city, in Kansas City. So the ideal day, someone's early. Someone comes in fairly early. He didn't have anything really special. He had a few things from Pope John Paul. He had some rosary beads. He had a few little things signed by the Pope. Nice, but not great. But then he starts pulling out some photographs. Turns out he was the pilot who flew the Pope and his entourage around the country in the 70s when he came. And he started telling stories about what was going on behind the scenes. And then there was this one photograph. Now, usually when you see a person with the Pope in a photograph, it's very, very formal. The Pope is in his full vestments. People are lined up. The Pope holds out his hand. People kneel, kiss his ring, and they get a photo, and that's the remembrance. This photo was the pilot was in the cockpit, in the pilot seat. The Pope was in his full vestments, but he was literally leaning over with one leg up, reaching down and signing his Bible. And I'm going, oh, this is great. And so I said to the man, okay, let me see the Bible. And he goes, oh, I didn't bring that. And I go, can you go get it? He says, no, it was a Saturday. It was in a safe deposit box. Later in the show, I did tape something, but it was like, ah. Now, one time, my wife did the show for a few years, but she did. I love standing there, seeing people talking, doing for 10 or 12 hours. she didn't enjoy that, so she only did it a couple of years. But when you do appraisals at groups like this, or on the phone, or by email, or other Antiques Roadshow, you would think, when I first started doing appraisals, you'd think that, well, you tell someone something's worth thousands of dollars, and they'll be thrilled. Well, and that's usually true. But how do you tell someone it doesn't have value? You know, are they going to be upset? Quite honestly, what happens almost all the time, you say, well, it might have sentimental, but it's real. They go, great! Now I don't have to worry about it. I can read it. I can give it to the grandchildren. I can give it to the library book sale. I don't have to worry. And actually, most people are thrilled when you say it's not of great value. But anyways, but you also cannot make everybody happy. No matter what you do, no matter how you do it, no matter how you say it, there are some people who are not going to be happy. This was, again, at an Antiques Roadshow. My wife was doing it. And again, a lady had been in line, and you want to be very nice. And the lady comes up to her and she goes, I have a book signed by A. Lincoln. And my wife was very nice. She takes the book, she looks at it, she looks at that, and she goes, yes, it is signed by A. Lincoln, but not the A. Lincoln we both want it to be. And the lady sort of in this tone goes, how can you tell? And my wife says, well, the first clue is, and she turns to the title page, she goes, this book was printed in 1911. And the lady goes, so? And my wife goes, well, I learned in school that Abraham Lincoln was assassinated in 1865. Lady slams the book shut and goes, you don't know what you're talking about. And, you know, and it's funny, you sort of laugh, but when somebody believes something and truly believes it, you cannot, once they've got it, that they believe it. And this isn't just books and so on, it's almost, you can't necessarily reasonably say, no, it isn't, and so on. But you can't make someone happy, and you can't change their mind if they've decided that that's what it is. You hopefully can show them, but in any case. I'll tell you what, I've talked a while. I can keep going forever, but why don't I see if there are some questions? And quite honestly, anything you ask me, I can go off on a tangent. So, anyone have any questions?
If anyone does have questions, just form a line.
Well, no, don't. If you have a question, just tell me. I'll repeat the question.
Oh, okay.
So I'll make sure that I do that. But anyone? No? Yes? Yes, so.
Are old textbooks ever valuable? Like, I'm talking about like maybe the 40s, 50s.
The question is, are old textbooks of value? In general, not. I mean, in general, they're not. But there is no question you can say that absolutely. First of all, if you get old textbooks back in the 1840s, 50s, and so on, they're not terribly valuable, but if they're in good condition, they make wonderful gifts for teachers or and $25, $30, they're fine. If you get old textbooks going back into the 16 and 1700s, that's a different type of textbook. Or if it happens to be a textbook that was a monumental textbook by a very famous author, and this was revealing, sometimes that can be. But then there was one textbook we had, and this was a textbook that a student had actually at West Point. It was a Spanish textbook, probably from, well, it was maybe World War I period more. And it was very obvious the student was really bored because there was doodles all through this textbook. I mean, I don't know whether they ever learned Spanish well, but it was obviously a very bored student. That student happened to be Dwight Eisenhower. So, yes, that textbook is valuable, not because of the textbook, but it was, so there's always the exception, there's always the thing. But in general, textbooks, when you think about it, how many schools are there? And how many students in every school? And the two types of books that tend to be in the worst condition, and condition can be very important to value, is children's books or books that children use, or cookbooks, because of the way they're used. Textbooks usually are used until they can't, the town doesn't buy new ones till the old ones fall apart. You had a question?
At the Antiques Roadshow, I was always curious about the people that come with these huge pieces of furniture.
At the, okay,
Is that a plan, or-
at the Antiques Roadshow, there are people who come with huge pieces of furniture. Sometimes they literally drag them in. But one of the things they do at the roadshow, this is if you have large pieces of furniture, you can send in pictures ahead of time, and they'll have one of the furniture people going through those pictures maybe 2 or 3 months before the show. And they'll pick out 4, 5, or 6, and sometimes then they'll send, if they select one of, for one reason or other, the appraiser who sees the picture thinks there might be a story to it. They're not the ones who are gonna be doing the appraisals at that show, but if you agree, they'll send a truck to move them, to bring it, so that they do have some large pieces. Then what happens is the appraisers who are doing furniture, before the show, they'll look at those 6 pieces, and maybe 2 or 3 of them are things that'll get on TV, and they decide who might do it. But they don't really know until just before the show begins. So there are a few, but I mean, they've had, there was one show, they've had people drive cars in, and the appraisers have gone outside. I mean, there's things. There was one show that I really wanted. Now, one of the strict rules of the Antiques Roadshow, you cannot tell somebody to bring something, because it would be a real temptation. I mean, if I want to get on TV, and I have a customer who has this great book, you can't say, well, come in, make believe you don't know it. And if the Antiques Roadshow ever found out, and it has happened on occasion, the appraiser is thrown off the show and never to be on again. But there was one show that I wish my friend had done it, and it wasn't a book. So he was a writer for the Boston Globe. I don't know whether a man named Michael Blowen and Diane White, he retired a long time ago, but when he retired, he loved horse racing. And he started this place called Old Friends Farm in Kentucky. Now there are a few of them, where they literally take in retired racehorses. I mean, literally, and because retired racehorses, once they've been put out to pasture and breed, they have no value. And so we went and visited him, and there was a show in Louisville, Kentucky, and it was near there, and we went to his farm, and I mean, there were horses that had won the Kentucky Derby, the Preakness, some of them had won 2, and then he had a horse called Zippo that won nothing in 100 races. But he had this portrait of Silver Streak, I think it's Silver Streak. The horse had won the Kentucky Derby, and he had Silver Streak, a white horse, and so on. And I said, do you know what would be a great appraisal? If you went to if the sporting people got this and they had the painting, then you had the horse too. And I said it would make, but he didn't. He brought in just a trophy and whatever. But so generally, a few of the larger pieces of furniture do that. And quite honestly, when they did convention centers, you could get in with the larger items. Now when they do these estates, some of them you have to go by bus to actually get to the location. And anything that's bigger than a bus door is a problem in any case. Did you have a question?
Yes. Did you ever hear of Lincoln Colquitt?
Lincoln?
Lincoln Colquitt, he's a...
No, Lincoln Colquitt I have not heard of. Tell me.
He's from Searsport, Maine.
No, I know a lot of book dealers and so on, but I don't know all of them. And, but there are a lot of interesting people and characters. And you know, one of the things is when you do appraisals like this, and you go to groups and you come in and ask questions, you know, there's just so many stories. You have a question?
Yeah. How do you appraise, even for insurance purposes, an irreplaceable item like the Paul Revere 4-page letter or something like that?
What you can do, the question is, how do you appraise one-of-a-kind things? Now, this happens, you know, a lot of times with paintings. I mean, they're one-of-a-kind. What you do in that case is there are Paul Revere items that have sold and sold at auction. There are things of Revolutionary War heroes that have shown up, either been sold privately or at auction and so on. And you say, well, this would be sort of like that. That got this. And you find things that are comparables. And then you put prices on them. But you know, the reality is you can never replace it no matter what it is. A couple of times when I've been called to do appraisals, and this is tricky, the insurance companies haven't always accepted it, but let's say you have, let's say for some reason this is a very valuable, rare item. And let's say it's your museum, and it's irreplaceable. But let's say maybe it's worth $100 or $200, but you have a lot of them. One of the things you might take into account, if one of the sprinkler heads goes off here, a lot of this is going to be damaged, and you might want to restore it. You know, that costs a fortune. So can you insure it for restoration cost? That's sometimes negotiated with an insurance company, but that's another way. And actually, an item that might be worth $100 might cost $1,000 to restore, and usually you can't get it restored because they'll say, okay, we'll pay the $100, but you know, that's a different insurance policy. That's whatever.
Do you have any experience with 16th and 17th century Book of Hours?
The question is, do I have any experience with 16th and 17th century books of hours in 15th and 16th and 14th? And we've had them, we've dealt with them. One of the things that's really interesting though, and I have some good feel for them, I can usually tell what is good, but there are people who specialize in that area. And there is no way you can ever know everything there is. Actually, I think if you did, it would get boring. But you don't have to know everything. All you have to do is know who does know and be on good enough terms with them that they'll answer your email or phone call. So if someone came in with me, what I thought were really good books of hours, which are the hand done by the monks in the monasteries and so on, I know the people who would know, and I could send email some pictures and so on, and get the information for the people. And if it was for sale, maybe partner with somebody, go in, or if it's an appraisal, I might say, well, this is the person you want to talk to, or whatever. So every little niche and nook and cranny of knowledge, there are people who specialize in it. I tend to be more a generalist, but I'm usually on good terms with all of the people. Someone came in today with a signed Profiles in Courage. I'm 90% sure that it was signed by a secretary. But I have a friend who we send an email down to. He'll get back to me probably tomorrow or the next day. He's an expert in those signatures. He might surprise me and say, no, this is actually Kennedy's. But Kennedy's signature is really hard to do. I'm 95% sure that it's not, but I double check. So you aren't asking me the question, but I said I would answer it anyways. Do I actually get some fines, or are those things that show up? This is one I particularly didn't want to talk about a little bit or publicize, but we just recently bought actually it's about this size. It's a piece of cardboard. It's printed in black with a black thing, and it's a ticket to a viewing on April 19th, 1865, in the Congress, and to view Lincoln's body. I mean, that's a very valuable ticket. I don't really like talking about assassinations of presidents right now. I just don't. It makes me a little uncomfortable. But we have that ticket. It's probably a $4,000 or $5,000 ticket, and it came in. It's sort of something that's, wow, look at this. A colleague of mine who does the Antiques Roadshow, now he does appraisals at estates, and recently he was in North Carolina. And this was just an old estate, and he was, you know, he doesn't do books, but he knows he's a generalist. And, you know, it was a very old estate. He was looking at the furniture, the paintings, the antiques, and so on. And there was a desk. He opened up the desk drawer. There was a piece of paper in the desk drawer. It was an early printing of the Constitution. It sold for $9 million. You know, so yes, fines like that do happen. Now, I don't know. He was the appraiser. I don't know whether he's getting any type of cut or percentage or whatever, but that had probably been in that desk drawer for 1787, probably been sitting there since then. Comes out, it's $9 million thing. And one other question that was asked earlier, someone said they had seen our store. There was a movie called The Holdovers that actually won an Academy Award. One of the scenes, the book scene, was shot at our store. And it was a lot of fun. Well, first of all, they paid really well, too. So if they wanted to shut us down every day of the year, at that price, I'd do it. But one of the fun things about it was to see how a Hollywood movie and how many people work on it. And you realize, and it was a winter scene, but it was shot in February. There wasn't any snow, and they wanted snow in the picture. Did you ever realize that someone would actually go to a shopping center and you have those big, huge piles of snow and actually pay for a truck of it? They had to buy a truck of it, and then they brought it, and they, with wheelbarrows, put it in front of the store. But Paul Giamatti was the star in that. He was wonderful. He came back the next 2 or 3 days, actually buying books, and he was very friendly and nice, and in any case, so we did that. I'll tell you, we're getting a little past. I'm going to tell 2 last stories, and then I'll end the talk, basically, but I'll stay and do any appraisals and so on. Okay, I'll do one more question, and then...
What is the oldest book you've encountered?
Well, the question is, what's the oldest book I've encountered? We literally have had manuscripts that have gone back to the 1200s and that. But at the store, we've had books in the 1400s. We've had a page from the first printed book, which is the Gutenberg Bible, which is 1456. Now, a Gutenberg Bible, if you had a Gutenberg Bible now, it's 2 big volumes. It would literally go into the hundreds of millions of dollars. But a single page you can get cheap at 150,000. So, you know, it's a bargain. But we've had that a few times. Anyways, last 2. People sometimes ask me, what's the most valuable book that we've ever had, and so on. And I've gone and asked that question a few times, and basically I've thought about it. And what I consider my most valuable book is an edition of The Night Before Christmas. It's a 1970s edition, very nicely illustrated. But that copy of The Night Before Christmas, like I said, my daughters are now in their 2 of them, one's late 30s, one's 40. I have read The Night Before Christmas to them from that book every single Christmas Eve since they were born. And now we have 4 grandchildren. One of them I haven't read it to because she's 5 months old, but I will get to it. And so I've read that to my children, my grandchildren, every single Christmas Eve, to the point where my daughter, who's 40, she married a man from Texas. They live in Massachusetts, which I'm very happy about, but she would go to Christmas in Texas a lot of times. Before FaceTime, I actually recorded it on YouTube so that Christmas Eve she could see me reading that to her. Now, FaceTime does a lot of that if they're away. My other daughter lives in Nairobi, and so I do it on FaceTime, but it's actually tricky because she has a 2-year-old, and, well, the 5-month-old might not, but the 2-year-old, a 2-year-old usually goes to bed by 6, 7 in the evening, but there's an 8-hour time difference. So you end up actually reading it on Christmas Eve almost the day before because of the time. But that book means more to me, is more valuable to me, is more precious to me than almost any other book. And matter of fact, my daughter who lives around here keeps it safe. She goes, so I can't sell it, but also so I can't lose it. But that book means more to me and is more precious and more valuable than anything else that I've had. Last story about Bibles. And I like talking about Bibles because Bible is the most commonly printed book of all time. Always has been, probably always will be. And we sometimes get 5 or 10 people a week calling with 100, 200-year-old family Bibles. And in most cases, we have to say to them, if this is your family Bible and it's been handed down through the generations, sentimentally, it's priceless. Monetarily, maybe not so much. Now, if you're one of the big Victorian Bibles with beautiful leather binding, embossed, class, those can go for $100 to $300 in perfect shape. But if they're not in perfect shape, they break a class, or they lose all that value. Sometimes in the beginning, middle, and end of those, there are family histories. Historical Society libraries like to get those, but they just want the digital image. They don't want the whole big old Bible. Bibles take up a lot of space. We actually had a museum that someone offered to give them Paul Revere's Bible, literally, his Bible with his name written in it, and they said no. And the reason they said no is all it had was his name written in it. I mean, if he had annotated, and they would have taken, no, but they weren't that, they don't collect Bibles because of the space. But they made sure that it got to the Paul Revere house, where it's a wonderful display and image. It wasn't like they dismissed it. But I got called to a large old church in Boston, well over a 100-year-old church. And they had a 3-story library in the church. And they wanted to know, they just accumulated books. Do they have any valuable books? And I spent a day there looking, and they had some good books. It was fun. End of the day, priest says to me, could you come down the basement? There are a few more books. Look at the few more books. And then they had a closet. Actually, it's more like a small room. It would cover this area here. Priest opened the door, floor to ceiling, front to back, top to bottom, stuffed with thousands of old Bibles. And I looked at the priest, and I go, what is this? And he says, well, people hate to throw away a book. They feel it's sacrilegious to throw away the Bible. So what happens when a parishioner dies and the family doesn't want the Bible? They come and they present it to the church. And he goes, what do? We don't want to offend anybody. We very graciously accept it, and then we go downstairs, open the door, put it in with the rest of them. And he goes, and we can't drive a dumpster up to the back of the church and fill it full of Bibles. That would just be terrible. So I use it as an example to say, if you want to give something to a charity, ask them if they want it first. If they want it and can use it, great, but if not, you're really not doing anyone a favor. I will say a couple of things. I do a podcast. I have about 200 20-minute episodes. I put one out every 2 weeks. So if you like the stories, there's a lot of them called Brattlecast.